Well, that New York Times headline getting a lot of attention tonight. Some on Mueller's team see their findings as more damaging for Trump than Barr revealed. According to government officials, the Times says, familiar with the Mueller team frustration. So let's bring in tonight's Legal Eagles, National Security Attorney Bradley Moss, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General John Yoo, and Fox News contributor Molly Hemingway. Welcome to all of you.
Great to be here.
Good evening.
Okay, so this is a little bit more that we get from that headline. It says some members of Mr. Mueller's team are concerned that because Mr. Barr created the first narrative of the special counsel's findings, Americans' views will have hardened before the investigation's conclusions become public. So apparently they're talking to the New York Times, Molly. Somebody is, and saying there's a lot of bad stuff in here for the president, but we're worried now that Barr's letter saying no collusion will taint what people think about the report.
Yeah, we're always told that the Mueller probe never leaks to anybody, but somehow we get information from people affiliated with the Mueller probe. In this case, the only thing that really matters is that there were no indictments, and that is already public, not just because Attorney General Barr told us, but we would know if that weren't true. We would know if there were indictments coming. There are no indictments coming. That is the most important thing for this probe that was about Russia collusion and obstruction. As for the idea of whether there might be damaging information in there, I assumed that there would be, and I think that probably everybody who's reasonable is preparing for that very real probability. This was a probe that went on for 2 years, and you saw when they would issue indictments or when they would get guilty pleas, they would really write it up in a very dramatic style. They did not seem particularly friendly to the president, and in fact, it's not the job of a prosecutor to be friendly. So it would be unsurprising if it didn't have a lot of negative information.
In the meantime, folks over in Congress making a lot of noise about they want to see the whole unredacted thing. They know there are limits on what the AG can release by statute, by law. They know there are limits on him. It doesn't stop the PR side of this. Today they voted to authorize subpoenas. Here's what the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, which of course is where they would launch impeachment, Jerry Nadler, here's what he had to say about whether he's willing to negotiate about how much of the Barr report comes out.
The committee must see everything, as was done in every prior instance. We're not willing to let the Attorney General, who after all is a political appointee of the President, make that substitute his judgment for ours.
But John, we highlighted on this show when it was President Bill Clinton, the Ken Starr report, Nadler was furious about the release of information. He wants it all now, though.
Look, it's just a publicity stunt. You don't subpoena a document before you give a chance to the person to give you the document. First, you get the Look, I was a Hill staffer on the Judiciary Committee, too. This is very irregular what they've done. Instead, you say, please give us the report. You look at the report, see if there are any redactions, and then you subpoena the stuff that you didn't get. The second point is it would be illegal for the Justice Department to hand over a report without scrubbing it. And then the third point is I actually think Nadler's making a mistake. If he really wants to check the president, hold oversight, even launch impeachment, he should do what they did in Iran-Contra. Call all the same witnesses that Mueller did. Ask them all the same questions. Why rely on Mueller at all? Bring them up before the American people and let's see what the witnesses have to say instead of complaining about redactions.
Well, I mean, it's almost certain, I think we'd all agree, that this is going to flood into 2020, whether they do launch some court battles, we're fighting over subpoenas, or whatever else happens. Politico says this, their headline is, prepare yourself, the Mueller redaction wars are coming. They say Democrats are in a tough position. Pursuing their legal challenge at all costs could feed the Trump-approved narrative that they're overzealous, but giving up risks angering their own Trump-hating base. So, Bradley, how do they make that calculation going into 2020?
Well, I think we're almost jumping a little bit ahead of the whole thing because we don't yet know what will be released from the report, how much the Justice Department will actually give us without a fight. And I think that's why the chairman, why Mr. Nadler did this. He's using it as a sword of Damocles. He's holding it over the Attorney General going, look, we can go this route if you play games with us, if you try to be overzealous in executive privilege invocations, in classified information invocations. We don't necessarily want to go there, but we can do this and we can have this fight. So let's see what the Attorney General gives us. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Former Director James Comey's willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's see what we get first, and depending on how overzealous it is, then we're going to see just how nasty these political and legal wars are going to get.
Well, and there's this whole conversation about whether damaging derogatory information on the president should be released if he's not going to be facing any kind of indictment or legal trouble, because we all saw that then FBI Director James Comey got in trouble because he unloaded, to many people thought, a whole case against Hillary Clinton, but she wasn't actually going to have a chance to defend herself in court. So where do we go with that? Because people on the Hill are going to want to see everything. But
In general, that is a very good principle to uphold, that if you're not charging someone with a crime, you don't smear them. And that was what was so wrong with what James Comey did with Hillary Clinton. In this case, I think that we've had 2 years of just absolute, we've had a country basically being held hostage by a narrative that Russia had intervened and that Trump was an agent of Putin. I think that more transparency in this case is good. And it's important to remember that the Department of Justice in the last couple of years has obstructed when Congress has asked for, when they've subpoenaed things, when they've tried to get information. The Department of Justice and the FBI have been very reticent to hand over that information. And so when the Republicans controlled these committees, they were looking for information about how this investigation started, how it got spread around, how the Clinton campaign operation got fed through all the parts of the government, and they weren't getting good answers. So I think more transparency is good for all sides.
Yeah, and we'll see. The president keeps talking about potentially declassifying a lot of that information too, which I'm sure will spark all kinds of other debates that you can come back and we'll have.
Anytime.
Thank you all very much. John Zine.
All 9 Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee calling for Congressman Adam Schiff to resign as chairman of the committee in the wake of the Mueller report. They accused the California Democrat of misleading the public by citing evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, even after the report cleared the president of such a charge. Joining me right now is Fox News contributor Trey Gowdy. He is a former Republican congressman from South Carolina, and he is the former chairman of the House Oversight Committee. He is also a former federal prosecutor. And Congressman, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Well, assess that. I mean, have you ever seen anything like that? 9 Republicans are asking the chairman to step down. What is your reaction to Adam Schiff's behavior?
Never seen that before. We had a lot of bad days the 8 years I was in Congress, but we never voted to remove or ask a chairperson to step down. Adam is a deeply partisan person. He did everything he could to make sure that Hillary Clinton became the next president, and he's done everything he could since he failed at that to keep a cloud over the Trump presidency. So the folks on the House Intelligence Committee on the Republican side, Maria, are not members of the crazy caucus. They're not bomb throwers. It's Elise Stefanik. It's Will Hurd, who was a CIA employee. It's Johnny Ratcliffe, who was a terrorism prosecutor. It's not part of the crazy caucus. These are reasonable Republicans, all of whom unanimously said, Adam, we've lost confidence in your ability to lead. And I think the next thing that's going to happen is the different intelligence communities, the different intelligence entities are going to say, you know what, Chairman Schiff, if you don't believe the information we provide to you, if you prejudge the outcome of investigations, if you have the President of the United States not just indicted but in jail, and you continue to leak like a screen door on a submarine, we're going to quit giving you information. That's when Pelosi will replace Adam Schiff with someone like Jim Himes, who's every bit as progressive. He's just a lot smarter and a lot more reasonable.
Right, you make a lot of good points, because here's a guy who's running around with his title and spewing out things that are actually coloring people's knowledge of what actually went down. You questioned John Brennan. Same story here. He's a former director of the CIA. So when you hear that title, you see that resume, you stop and you listen. And yet it was back in May of 2017 when you poked holes in his idea that the president had committed treason. He used that word on CNN many times. Here's that exchange between you and Brennan last year.
It's a really simple question. Did evidence exist of collusion, coordination, conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russian state actors at the time you learned of 2016 efforts?
I encountered and am aware of information and intelligence that revealed contacts and interactions between Russian officials and U.S. persons involved in the Trump campaign that I was concerned about because of known Russian efforts to suborn such individuals. And it raised questions in my mind, again, whether or not the Russians were able to gain the cooperation of those individuals. I don't know whether or not such collusion, that's your term, such collusion existed. I don't know. But I know that there was a sufficient basis of information and intelligence that required further investigation by the Bureau to determine whether or not U.S. persons were actively conspiring, colluding with Russian officials.
Sufficient basis? And let me correct myself, that was 2 years ago. 2 years ago you poked holes in this narrative. How did this happen, Congressman? So how do you launch a major investigation into a candidate who's running for president based on no predicate?
Well, let me first note, Maria, that was a Republican asking a question about collusion, because you would never know that if you read the Washington Post and the New York Times. They wanted you to believe that Republicans didn't care about collusion. That was a Republican on national television asking about collusion. It began because of a guy named Peter Strzok, with his historic animus towards Trump in July of 2016, launching a counterintelligence investigation into the Trump campaign. This is about 10 days before he talked about an insurance policy. It was after he said Clinton should win $100 million to nothing. It was after he said Trump would be destabilizing for our country. It was just before he said he had no interest in being part of the special counsel unless it led to impeachment. That's the guy who started the counterintelligence investigation into President Trump. But that's the same investigation that a lot of my Republican colleagues now want you to read the report. It was a flawed ab initio from its inception investigation, and now some of my Republican colleagues want you to read a report on a flawed ab initio investigation.
Trey, you said a minute ago this was based on a faulty investigation from the start. What about the AG releasing the full Mueller report? Where are you on that?
Maria, I bifurcate the investigation and therefore the report. Part of it is what did Russia do in 2016? I am all for my fellow citizens understanding what Russia tried to do to this country. I think it'll be unifying. The other part of the equation is with whom, if anyone, did they do it? And Mueller, you know, Adam and Swalwell and Beto, they all talk about evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. That's what it takes to convict. Mueller didn't even find the lowest level of evidence that anyone in the Trump campaign did it with Russia. There's not even probable cause. So I realize the populist thing to do is say release it all, which, by the way, is against the law. You can't release it all. Let's assume you can just release what you can that's not classified. We are now in the uncharted territory of releasing reports on people for whom there is not even the lowest level of evidentiary standard, not even probable cause. And once you begin to go down that path where you're going to issue reports and do press conferences on people who are not indicted, for whom there's no evidence they committed a crime, then we're in a brand new day politically when the department can do oppo research on a campaign and then under the guise of a report release it but never charge them. I hope we never get to that point, and that's why I'm in a very small minority that doesn't think that part of the report should be made public. I realize I'm in the minority, but I'm not a populist.
Yeah, I noticed that John Ratcliffe took a little walk when the vote came, so he also agrees don't release it because it's not right, and for all the reasons you just mentioned. Look, as I think about this, I feel like this whole thing started by the Clinton machine. Hillary Clinton wanted dirt on Donald Trump. She paid for the dossier. They protected her for her own investigation. It's just extraordinary where we are as we look back. Congressman, it is good to see you this morning. Thank you.